Hi, Nick here from Pods with Nick and James. Just a quick one before we get into this podcast. I want to say a massive thank you for the support that we've received since starting these podcasts. We thoroughly enjoy it and we look forward to creating more. If you want to have your say on any topics that we've discussed or suggest future topics, then you can do so at www.reddit.com/r/Nick and James Pods. And if you want to support us, you can do so for from as little as £1 a month, and you can do that at www.patreon.com/pods with Nick and James. Anyway, back to the podcast. Hi, welcome back to Pods with Nick and James. My name's Nick. This is James.
Hi there.
Today we're going to discuss the amazing feats of ancient Egypt and how the mainstream narrative is contradicted by the evidence. To give a bit of context, there is a narrative given out. I mean, I know I learned it at school that Egyptians were Stone Age to early Bronze Age peoples, maybe into the mid Iron Age, and they managed to craft some rather incredible things. Not just talking about the pyramids. We're going to try and stay away from the pyramids if we can, because my interest in this is mainly to do with the smaller things that they crafted. But we will talk a little bit about the Sphinx and how can you talk about it without talking about either of those things. Now, I know when I was growing up in school, they taught us that they would use hammers. And I mean, I've watched enough videos on YouTube to know that they tried to tell you that the obelisks, the massive granite obelisks that they've got in and throughout Egypt, they were pulled out of the ground by pounding diorite stones against the granite to shape it, and then they were lifted and moved on rollers across miles and miles and up rivers and whatnot, and then put into Valley of the Kings and certain temples around Egypt. I mean, there are thousands of just obelisks, but even they're a little bit big for what we're kind of discussing in this podcast. But I wonder if, to give the context and for to give the foundation of the conversation, James, you'd like to do your best at kind of bringing us the narrative, bringing us the mainstream of what.
Okay, so the mainstream foundation of basic Egyptology is that ancient humans and Neanderthals followed the flow of the cradle of humanity in Africa and followed literally the banks of the Nile River as it flowed northward, which is interesting that they call Upper Egypt is upstream, which is south, and Lower Egypt is downstream, which is north. Like the Nile is the lifeblood of Egypt. But the basic narrative is that in ancient times, prehistoric, before I didn't even know there were multiple ages to the Stone Age, which really shows my ignorance on this. The fact that Neolithic is still considered to be relatively new, but the idea is in Neolithic times, before any written records existed, ancient people were able to spread from Africa into Europe using the Nile by traveling along its banks. The reason why they could do this is that at the time, it is theorized. I say, well, it's genuine consensus is that the land was incredibly fertile because the Nile River, unlike the Tigris and the Euphrates, which create the Golden Crescent, which move all the time and are unreliable by comparison, the Nile is consistent, benign, traversable, and so reliable that it bursts its banks at the same time every single year, depositing rich soils on the surrounding area. In fact, it's theorized that was the reason why ancient Egypt was so incredibly strong is that in order to create a food source, the ancient Egyptians didn't even need to plow fields. They just waited for the Nile to burst its banks, threw a load of seed into the now muddy earth, and then got their cattle or their children or whoever to just walk up and down it a couple of times, and that was enough to create a surplus of food, allowing for art and for huge amounts of kind of ancient culture to be invested in. The basic idea is that for some reason, and they don't even go into this. This is the bit I don't know what I believe when I come to this. I'm more certain of my own metaphysical beliefs rather than what my historical beliefs in this. But the historical narrative is that somehow the ancient Egyptians the Nile was so and the lands surrounding it was so fertile that before there was even a pharaoh in Egypt, and it was made up of different kingdoms, the people were so well fed that they could create the Great Pyramids, that they could create not the Great Pyramids, sorry, those were pharaoh based, but they could create loads, well, if I'm honest with you, thousands of these granite vases, which is going to be the main topic or the main focus of this pod, to my understanding. These granite vases, that the narrative, and the narrative that up until watching these videos I did believe myself, was that the Egyptians were just incredibly skilled craftsmen who were able to use materials on the same scale of measurement as diamond, and through using hand tools at a time when only the hand axe, which isn't actually an axe, it's just a stone that you hold in your hand and has been melded to the shape of your palm, were able to create these near, we'll go into the precision later, but near perfect cylindrical vases with additional lud handles which do not match the basic idea is that somehow, it's not known, but it's just believed through traditional methods, ancient Egypt became incredibly advanced, and then for some reason slowly declined over the course of, I think it's in about 4,000 years. I know it was 3,000 BC is when the early pharaohs started, and then it was Cleopatra the Seventh, who's the famous one, who was the last
with Mark Antony, married to Mark Antony.
With the last bit of that.
That was
that's where
30 BC. He lived until 30 BC. And that was,
okay.
She was seen as the last Egyptian queen, yeah.
Yeah, okay, well I know I've probably...
No, you're all right. So from
about
I've
3,000... I've missed out a whole bunch there, but...
From about 3,200 BC until... And this is like civilized Egypt. So from about 3,200 BC until about 30 BC, Egypt existed, which is longer than any country that exists on the planet now.
It's older
as
than China,
exist.
which is interesting. I love the way that it's put in some of the videos that they pointed out that um, the vases that we're going to look at predate the Great Pyramid, which King Tut or Tutankhamun had been around, or sorry, Tutankhamun would look at the Great Pyramids and go, okay, cool, those were made 1,000 years ago.
Yeah,
So
no,
they
I
were
mean,
already ancient when he
yeah.
existed.
I mean,
And
a really
then,
cool thing that I've heard, and it's really awesome to think about. It's actually closer in our time to the days of Cleopatra than it was from Cleopatra to the days of the first Egyptians.
that's it. That's it. Because you've got several thousand years between the Great Pyramids and King Tut, and then another over 1,000 years from King Tut to Cleopatra. So like ancient Egypt was literally looking back, looking back, looking back, constantly looking back, and having these like we talk about in this country how Londinium, for example, was abandoned for a couple of 100 years
Yeah,
when the Romans, well, buggered off and left us. And there's talk of like the poetry that was made of the time, of this deep sense of loss, and how people would look at these buildings and not understand how they were built, and like just this idea that we can't do this anymore. I can only imagine how much on a more horrible scale it was for anyone living in Egypt, and how it must be in many ways to have the sprawl. No, that's the wrong way of saying it, but to have the modern structures of Egypt, to my knowledge, and I'm very sorry if I'm wrong and this is ignorant and an ignorant Western point of view, but pale in comparison to the Great Pyramids. And it's
yeah.
just,
I think that to put it in context for people, I think basically what you're saying is if you think about Western advancement technologies, etc., you've got like the Empire State Building, etc. You've got what's that one in Dubai? Um,
oh god damn it, I know the one you mean.
yeah,
Yeah.
the really big one.
Right,
Yeah.
no, we need to look this up. We need to look this
Well,
up.
I'll
This is
carry
going
on.
to be this is so bad.
Yeah, but you've got like buildings like that, that are feats of years and years of refining and developing techniques for building and constructing, which I'm being quite broad in the way that I'm talking, but the point is there, like, the Western world developed these techniques over hundreds of years to be able to slowly but surely build bigger and bigger and bigger things. And you can say the same thing with the quality of workmanship with the smaller objects too. Over time, our abilities have grown with the knowledge of our forebears, and our skill has grown as a
Waned.
result of it. No, our skill has grown. We've been able to build bigger buildings and taller objects and more beautiful jewelry over time, etc. That's not the case with Egypt. That's the thing, I think, that could be quite a good starting point here. So the vases that James was talking about with
It's the Baraji
the
Khalifa.
Burj Khalifa, yep, Burj
Burj
Khalifa,
Khalifa,
yep,
standing at 800,
yeah.
around 825 meters tall.
Yeah, and
Right.
even looking at the wall, the city. I think I showed you it last time, didn't I? The Saudis' wall that they're building, the city that is basically just along. I think they call it the line, or something like that. Building in Saudi Arabia. My God, that thing's going to be incredible. But it's essentially a city that is one building. It's going to be miles long and thousands of shops and houses and whatnot all inside it. Anyway, but that wouldn't have been possible without the thousands of people that have come before, the hundreds and hundreds of years of technology development that have come before. Now, these vases we're talking about, these objects that are incredibly detailed. I wouldn't even say detailed. They're quite minimalist, aren't they? However, they are, for lack of a better term, perfect. They are perfectly sculpted vases. And I know it sounds ridiculous to be talking about vases. I'll explain in more detail about the vases in a moment. But these vases were pre-dynastic. And to explain what that means to the layman, they are pre-recorded history of Egypt. So, for example, there are 30 to 40, maybe even 50,000 of these vases that are incredibly detailed and incredibly precise, shall we say. Not detailed, but they are incredibly precise. Found in one of the earliest temples, in one of the earliest pyramids, the Step Pyramid, Djoser's Pyramid, in Egypt, buried with Djoser. So, Djoser being the pharaoh of the time, this is 2600 BC. 2600 BC, he's the pharaoh of the time. He's got all the gold and the wealth and whatever. He chooses to be buried with 50,000 of these vases instead of gold and all the gems and whatever else. He wants to take these vases to the afterlife. That's how important these things were to a pharaoh at the time. A pharaoh that built one of the earliest still standing pyramids that you can go and visit. It's called the Step Pyramid. Please do. These vases, they're not made on a turning wheel. The Egyptians didn't have the wheel. As far as mainstream theologians go, mainstream historians, if you want to be pedantic, they didn't have the wheel to be able to turn a pot. Not only that, but they're not clay, are they, James?
No, so I guess I'll talk a little bit. So, although Egypt doesn't have marble, it does have granite. I didn't even know about the hardness scale, but the very fact that it is
the most hot scale
included
of hardness,
the fact that it's included in the top 10 hardest natural materials.
So I have got the hardness scale here, and I'll just quickly give a rundown of this. So,
cool. I'm going to learn something too.
The bigger the number, all right, the harder the object. Okay, so you've got like sandstone, talc, those kind of rocks are 1 on the hardness scale. Okay, like chalk. Gypsum is 2, calcite is 3, fluorite 4. Now, if you think about your fingernail is between 2 and 3 on the hardness scale. A copper penny is between 3 and 4. You got apartheid, which is 5. Orthoclase, which is 6. Now, between 5 and 6, you've got glass plates and knives and things like that. Manufactured metals. They're between 5 and 6 on the hardness scale. Quartz is 7 on the hardness scale. Between 6 and 7 is a steel nail. The quartz is harder than a steel nail. Topaz and other gems are 8 on the hardness scale. Corundum is 9 on the hardness scale, and between 8 and 9.
What is corundum used for?
Corundum is, I'm not sure, but granite falls at 9 as well.
Okay.
And diamond is 10. So between 8 and 9, you have a masonry drill bit, okay, which is obviously like machine made, and it is between 8 and 9 on the hardness scale. We do have things that can cut through the use of diamonds. So you have diamond tip drill bits. They would be 10 on the hardness scale, but that's because they're using diamond. Okay, but it's technology that has brought it to the point where we have that level of hardness. Sorry, I'll go back to you. So yeah, granite falls at 9 on the hardness scale, but that's the Mohs hardness scale.
So what really surprises me about these vases is a number of them were discovered in the 1920s, whereas they may have just so one of the first. Oh, I'm not sure, Nick, whether we start to talk about why they're amazing or put it in context, but I guess I'll quickly put
Let's
it in
go
context in
context
that
first, yeah.
these things were found in a number of tombs, and apparently there was found, was it 50,000
Yeah, in Joseph's
of
pyramid, there were
these?
50,000, up
Yeah,
to
okay,
50,000, yeah.
50,000 of these, if I'm honest with you, small, almost like gin flask size vases, which were clearly used almost as like an everyday cup or an everyday container.
Could almost
Um,
pass as a flower pot. I mean, you
well, yeah,
expect to
yeah,
see them with flowers on your nan's shelf kind of thing, you know?
absolutely. Like somewhere between that and an urn for storing ashes in, or something along those
Yeah, I'd
lines.
give
It's
you that,
just
yeah.
an everyday sort of item. So what's weird about them is first the material that they're made out of is far harder than bronze, which is the material that all civilizations um, had afterwards.
Yeah,
So it's
so
really frustrating for.
Egyptians would have had copper.
Mm,
Yeah, which is even softer, because obviously bronze is an alloy of copper.
yeah, it's isn't it copper and tin, or is it copper and zinc? I know one makes brass. One of those combinations makes brass. One of those combinations makes bronze.
If you
But
wanted specifics, you should have told me earlier. I got a metallurgist to join us.
sorry. Well, regardless, bronze became a popular tool, became the most popular tool element because it shatters less than stone. Although some traditional materials can hold an edge as good as steel, famously, obsidian can hold its edge even better than steel, but it becomes brittle very easily. Stone is fantastic, but it's brittle every single time. Bronze, copper is good because it can hold an edge fairly well. Um, Bronze is better because it can hold an edge a little bit better, but unfortunately, including tin again makes it slightly brittle, which is why a lot of swords were kind of like smaller, because you push bronze too far, it shatters. It's why iron was such a huge step forwards, because all of a sudden you had this metal which was so much stronger and didn't like bend and then snap. It would then bend and go back, or even better, not bend at all. It's honestly, so at this time, iron. I can't even remember when the Iron Age began, but it's ages away. It's like we're talking that what's considered the new kingdom of Egypt is the time when iron became even mildly used anywhere in the world.
Yeah, so
So this is
1200 BC
before,
to 500 BC.
yeah. So this is before iron. This is before bronze. Um, they are literally using copper somehow to shape a material which is far harder than copper, which doesn't it doesn't make sense.
Well,
Now,
I sent you a video, didn't I, of a guy, an Egyptian bloke who still lives in get the place now, in Egypt, and he makes sculptures in what he believes to be as close to the ancient method as possible. And this is done through the use of, bear in mind, he is using modern tools. He has steel hammers, and he chips away at the stone with steel hammers. And he has a hand drill, which is steel, but it's a hand drill, and he cores out the vase, and he will shape it and sand it and rub it down and make it look as good as he possibly can using these ancient methods. And this is a bloke that makes a living doing what he does. However, the quality of his work is a shadow of the quality of these vases. And
This
he
man
is
has also been doing this for
his entire
60
life.
years.
Yeah, 60 years, yeah.
And he spends months on each of these things. Now, I know you can say that, all right, maybe one of these people, maybe these ancient crafters knew something that he didn't. Very probable.
Absolutely.
And maybe if you're a rich ass pharaoh, you can afford to have 50 of these blokes, 100 of these blokes, spending years making these things.
Goza had 50,000 of these things.
Exactly.
In his pyramid.
The number doesn't add up. Additionally, when these vases were scanned, this is the thing that really kind of... Okay, so you know what, I'm going to let you talk a bit about these vases and why they're important, and then I'll jump in with anything that's missed, because this is something you've opened my eyes to.
So,
yeah.
These vases were scanned by Christopher Dunn's son. Now, Christopher Dunn is quite famous in the less than mainstream, shall we say, Egyptian history niche. His son, so Christopher Dunn is an engineer that released a book about the pyramids being an ancient power plant. It's well worth a read, and please do not dismiss it based on the fact that it sounds outlandish. The bloke is an engineer. He's lived his entire life as an engineer, and he approached I think what set him apart from historians when it comes to how he looked at ancient Egypt is he approached it with a scientific mind, and he thought, with the technologies that we have now, how would I do this, and what would I use, and what would I use it for? And all that he found was he had more than just questions when trying to apply that thinking and that mentality to the mainstream narrative. So he had to put aside the mainstream narrative in order to find possible explanations for a lot of what the Egyptians did. And please do quote me on this. He does not aim to take anything away from the ancient Egyptians. What he does aim to do is change the narrative surrounding it. And I think that's really important to state, because the last thing that anybody that I've listened to or spoken to about this wants to do is, the last thing they want to do is take anything away from the ancient Egyptians. They're not saying that the ancient Egyptians didn't do any of these things. They're saying the way that we believe they were done cannot possibly be the way that they were done. Anyway, I've digressed. So Alex Dunn is Christopher Dunn's son. He's also an engineer, and he has scanned a pre-dynastic vase, which is from a private collection, and the video about it is on Ben Van Kerkwick's YouTube channel called Uncharted X. Please do go check it out. It's a fantastic video where he and Nick Sierra, I believe his name is, go into much more detail than I'm going to here about how precise this vase is. Now, it's not the only vase they scanned. There is other videos on Ben's channel where they talk about other vases that they scanned, and they are just as incredible as this one. Some of them possibly more so. Christopher Dunn was actually wowed by one that was slightly more flat and bulbous. And you go check the YouTube videos out if you want more details on those. I'm going to be focusing on the first object that they scanned. So this is using really detailed light scanning, and they have this vase centered on a platform, and then a light scanner orbits this vase and scans it thousands and thousands and thousands of times and creates a digital image of this which can be brought up in programs such as Blender on your computer. And then they analysed the geometries of this vase. And to say that it is symmetrical is an understatement. To say that it is precise is almost laughable, because Alex Dunn, Nick Sierra, Christopher Dunn, all were blown away by the level of precision in these vases. Bear in mind the age of these vases. They have been through the mill. They've passed hands. However, they are still incredibly precise and incredibly well made, to the point where they would struggle to make them like this now with the tools that they have. The reason for this is because granite is it's not a single material. Granite is like a matrix of materials, all blended together, vitrified together to create a stone. You've got quartz in there, you've got alabaster in there, you've also got granite in. Now, the main thing about that makes this incredible is that if you've got all of these different objects, all of these different materials, when you're working, I think the easiest way to describe it is think about a tree rubbing. When you put a bit of paper over a tree and you grab a crayon and you rub the crayon across the tree and it makes that pretty pattern on the paper, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason your crayon makes those lines across the paper is because as you rub that crayon, let's get a bit scientific now. As you rub that crayon across the paper, it goes across surfaces which are resistant, and then it goes across areas of the surface which are not resistant. And so there's drag and there's no drag. And there's areas where the crayon leaves a massive entrail, and there's areas where the crayon does not. That's where you get the rubbing from. It's the same thing when you're working on granite. You are going across areas where there's quartz, and then all of a sudden you hit alabaster, which is as hard as sandstone, and your proverbial pen, your tool, would shoot across the paper, and your precision is lost. Your geometry, your perfection is lost. So you have to be able to change how hard you are pushing your tool through the object so frequently to give you the level of precision that is within this vase. To go into detail about how precise these vases are, if you put a center point at the vertical center of the vase, so from bottom to top, had a pin and went from bottom to top and then rotated the vase around it, the spherical nature of the vase is to within a couple of thousandths of an inch all the way around from bottom to top. The top is flat to within a couple of thousandths of an inch. There is a circular nature to the vase. If you look at it face on, and you took the outer edges of the vase as your diameter, and then added a center point at your vertical center, and you use from the vertical center to the outer edge as your radius, and you just almost like a pin to the center and ran a pencil in a circle like that, it would be perfect to within a thousandth of an inch from edge to edge. The most incredible thing about this is that in order to get this now with modern technology, you would spin this thing on a lathe. You would spin it on a turn or on a lathe, and you would rub it from bottom to top. But the thing that throws that off is these lug handles, these little nubbins on opposite sides of this vase. Now these lug handles are perfectly opposite each other to within a thousandth of an inch. They are parallel. If you had a straight line drawn across the top of the vase, they are parallel to that top of the vase from one lug handle to the other to within thousandths of an inch. And they are exactly the same shape on both sides to within a thousandth of an inch. Now, I want to just explain the context, the width of a human hair, in order to help you understand how precise this is. Okay? Bear with me. So, a human hair is 1,000th of an inch thick at least, and is 0.006 of an inch. That's 6,000th of an inch thick at the most for people that have thick hair. Okay? So the level of precision on these vases is to within the width of a human hair across so many different points.
The interesting thing is that there are multiples of these.
Yeah, it's not just one that was perfect.
If you had multiple... So first off, a single... I'm trying to think of the right way of putting this. A single human hair, the difference in a couple of vases of a single human hair is not something... Now, I can't speak for ancient craftspeople, but it is not something that I could notice. I wouldn't be able to notice. I wouldn't know what to... Yeah, I wouldn't know how to see that, how to... I'm trying to think of the right wording here. I wouldn't be able to take a fine sanding tool, turn this vase on a wheel or whatever, look at another vase and go, my one needs a little bit more off.
Yeah.
When it is to within a hair's breadth.
And the other thing that there's 2 points that obviously you've made there that are bang on the money. One, you'd need something perfect to compare it against in order to know that yours isn't quite there yet. But the other is that you would need to be rotating it in some way, and they didn't have the wheel.
What also really surprised me is that the easy kind of cop-out or disprover here that I imagine a lot of people are going to is, well, these things were discovered in the 1920s. Couldn't somebody have just made them then? And what really surprises me is that modern scientists are looking at these today. They don't know how they were made. They say that, okay, well, we could make something that's similar, and they don't say it. They do say, we can make this.
They say we would struggle to make something this precise.
Well, they do say that, but in order to make one of these, they would have to use aeronautic machines.
Yeah.
Now, what I mean by that is they would have to use machines that are used in the manufacture of aerospace machinery and aircraft.
Yeah, they couldn't do it by hand. Certainly not with copper tools.
They couldn't do it by hand. They couldn't do it with copper tools. And annoyingly, they couldn't do it to the point where one of these would be affordable for an individual. Like, just the scanning equipment alone that Nick talked about earlier is worth several $1 million.
Yeah.
Just to scan these things. In order to scan it, shape it, rescan it, and just kind of to do the whole process, I don't even want to think how much one of these would cost. But it would be massive. It would be, this is your prized possession in your home. This is... I don't know. I don't actually... I suppose the most expensive thing I own other than my car is the PC that I'm currently recording this on. But it would be more expensive than that.
Yeah.
Way more.
Yeah. Because the level of precision that you'd need to be using the most top of the range technologies to make it. And that would cost extortionate amounts of money. The most incredible thing about some of this is that some of these vases that they were looking at are almost paper thin. Like, they've sculpted them to a point where you can put a light inside the vase and see the light through stone.
Yeah, like, well, what really um what really gets me as well is that these vases, they stop appearing. They stop appearing in. I'm trying to think of the right way of putting it. They're found in certain tombs which date them to pre-dynastics, and there are some pharaohs who had less of these vases as time goes on.
Yeah.
And it gets to the point where they disappear.
Before the new dynasty, really.
Yeah.
I mean, they're almost not there after the new dynasty, which we're talking, like, I think it's about 1000 BC, isn't it? 1500 BC.
It's still
It's 2000 years after the first vase that was found. The first vase was buried in Joseph's period.
Still several hundred years before the first coins.
Yeah.
So you've still got people who trade in bronze ingots, in silver ingots, in imperfect measurements, using weighing scales to determine value.
Yeah.
Rather than simply the symbology of coins. It was still very much trade using physical products.
Yeah.
To put it in context. So you've got it doesn't. I don't know how these things were made. I'm sure 1,000,001 people can come up with 1,000,001 different theories on how they might have been made. All I can say is that the classic narrative doesn't fit.
No, it doesn't.
I don't know what that actually means. I don't know.
I'll tell you what also doesn't fit. What also doesn't fit is that people forgot how to make them. A civilization existed that had knowledge and went, yeah, we don't need that anymore. And it's not like they were constantly at war. Like, they were thriving for 3,000 years. Yeah, 2,000 years. Let's say 2,000 years. They were certainly doing well for 2,000 years, to the point where they could build megalithic structures. Not just one, not just the Khufu Pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza.
That is, yeah.
But hundreds of pyramids across their country, temples all over the place, obelisks everywhere. Like, you have to have an abundance and a level of status quo, shall we say, to have the time on your hands to build these temples and to build these great structures. So don't just lose technology over time. You develop technology. If we lost technology, we're going to wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden we're back in the Stone Age. That's basically what they're saying in the mainstream narrative, is that they just forgot how to do it like this.
Yeah, but the way that it's done is they forgot how to do it like this. Yeah, these vases are quite nice. They're not that nice though.
Yeah,
like it's just skipped over completely.
and it's only people like Petrie who was, I suppose, one of the first people to really start to look at some of the core samples from. So basically, there's like holes in the feet of some of these granite structures, and the cores from the drills that made these holes are also in some of the temples. And one of the things that really drew Flinders Petrie to Egypt was the fact that there's a consistent rotation on some of these granite core samples, meaning that you had a object that could cut through granite at such a rate that it could make a spiral and not just a bunch of concentric circles all the way down, because essentially you have to think about it along the lines of, if you're gonna core out something, you need the object to core it out to be sufficiently harder so that it can make that spiral pattern. Otherwise, what you get is a number of rotations before you actually make headway, and so what you get is concentric circles instead. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's a consistent spiral pattern all the way down granite, which is 9 on the Mohs scale of hardness. Ridiculous to think that they had an object that could core granite out so effectively. And he went, wow, this is incredible, we need to look at this. Historians went, no, it's just a core sample, what are you talking about? And they completely dismissed him. But he was the first person that kind of went, we need to look at how some of this stuff was done, because they weren't using copper tools. And then to try and debunk Petrie, they almost like debunked themselves. It was hilarious because they had a massive copper core drill, and they had a granite block, and then they had a bowstring, and they were drilling, and they'd use sand to dump into the hole that they were trying to drill, because in the sand is little bits of corundum and little bits of granite and little bits of quartz that would effectively act as the blade whilst the copper tool was rubbing, and it effectively would start to core out granite. It would core out granite and make the hole in a rendition of what this core sample was showing. But what you wouldn't see is this concentric ring, this consistent spiral all the way down the core. You would see a bunch of concentric circles, as Petrie explained you would if you were using copper tools, without needing to test it. He went, that's not how this was happening. That would show this result. And then they went, no, this is how he did it. And then they used the copper tool, and they showed exactly what Petrie said they would get if they. It was actually quite funny. But then they still said, "Oh, we've proven that it can be done." So it's how they did it.
It does annoy me when news articles or reviews of debates don't show what actually happened. You know, like, it's so easy to package things in a way, because how often do people actually watch the whole video or read the whole article?
No, what they're doing is they're going there for information. They're not going there for the keys to their own investigation. They are going there for you to tell me the findings of your investigation. And not from a scientific perspective, from a purely hypothetical, I don't really care, I don't need to know kind of basis. You just tell me what you think and I'll take that as gospel.
Yeah, that's it, and that is the problem. I think, right, my worldview hasn't been tipped on its core, but I will admit that this is a very interesting anomaly, which does raise a lot of questions and does make me very aware how much of my knowledge is secondhand knowledge.
Yeah.
And
I'm in the same boat, and it's only because I am like maybe 2 years ahead of you on that journey that I feel like I'm a bit more wise, shall we say, to checking checking the facts, as it were.
Checking your sources. Well, I will
Yeah.
admit that this has actually come up in other ways as well. Like even listening to just a quick shout out to one of the things which taught me about the basic. So we did Crash Course by somebody. It's really weird. There seems to be multiple people with the last name of Green, but during this video, at least, he claims himself as John Green. Um, he gave us he did a really good video on the ancient history of Egypt. The Great Courses Plus also did a book, but on ancient Egypt, the history of ancient Egypt, which I'm currently going through. Even and that was by Bob Breyer, who actually also narrates the book. So that's actually interesting to see that they didn't get a professional narrator. It's just he did it. Even in that, he's telling me. So Bob, as he goes by, Breyer is telling me things about Neanderthals which contradicts all of the other scientific things that I've been told about Neanderthals, because in several versions of like abbreviated history of mankind, we killed out the Neanderthals because they were stupider. They were stronger than us, like physically tougher, but they didn't have imaginations. And then what Robert Breyer says is, no, they were basically the same. Like they were literally the same. They had burial rights. They showed, uses of tool.
Neanderthals were a level up to us. They were stronger than us. They were smarter. They were able to coordinate attacks better than we were. And yet, somehow, Homo sapien managed to trump. We were nearly wiped out. We were nearly wiped out. We were nearly extinct because of Neanderthals.
It is interesting, though, that the historical sources on this disagree. Like that's the thing that's the thing that kind of annoys me, because when you take all of this as gospel, as you do when you're accepting information, and it's one of the things that's making me wonder if the younger generation has it right with the number of them that are refusing to go to school, although that's a whole other topic and a whole other kettle of fish.
For which reason is the main thing that I query. Yeah. No, I'm with you, but yeah, carry on.
But it's like there are several versions of the official history when it comes to the death of the Neanderthals and the ancient. Is it Neolithic? I know it's not Neolithic, because Neolithic is New Stone Age. Mesolithic is Middle.
Okay.
What's the old Stone Age?
Is it Paleolithic?
You know what? Yes, there we go. Paleolithic. All right. In the accounts of the Paleolithic times, every single scholar seems to have their own ideas, and yet every single one of them, even though they are contradictory, is accepted into the manifold of mainstream history. Yet when it comes to these vases, because of the weird arse implications and the fact that it sheds light on just how little we know about the situation, it's immediately sidelined into alternative history.
Yeah, it's
which may as well.
Not even like they say, oh, they don't exist. They do. They accept the fact they exist, and they even go, yes, they're there. You can go see them in the museums, but they don't really matter. You don't have to go and see them. That's not the real thing. Look at these pyramids. Aren't they fantastic?
Yeah.
No, we need to talk about these vases for a second, guys. Come on. No. They're just a pretty vase.
Well, the weird thing is as well, like they don't even have. There's not even a group name for it.
No, there's not. No.
You know what I mean? Like we keep on going, oh, these vases. Nobody's going to know what the flip we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be completely honest. Because I watched a little bit of Uncharted X before he got into the scanning of these pre-dynastic vases, and when he first showed this vase, I was like, but it's just a bloody vase, mate.
Yeah,
And then I watched the video, and I was like,
the same.
"What are you talking about?"
The same. And then just slowly but surely, it's just layer after layer after layer. And the people who are doing this as well, it's not like I'm sorry to say this. This is going to sound really bad, but it's not even like the guys who did Zeitgeist who use even minorly sensationalism. These are hardcore scientists who they don't even come out with the, oh well, they must be using lasers, or oh well, it must have been aliens, or it must have been this, it must have been that. They just literally say this is incredibly perfect.
Yeah, this is
I
accurate to
don't
within thousandths of an inch.
I don't think you can do this with this tool. I don't think we can make something this good nowadays.
As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, Ben has said and has got offers from members of the public who are going to try and use hand tools to manufacture these vases. They've got the scans of the vases on their computers. They are happy to go and grab the materials and use specifically the tools that they have available to them. And
are you going to include the videos and maybe a link to the pots
on the Reddit? I will put
okay, great.
contradicts YouTube channel. I'll specifically link the videos that we're talking about here, and that specifically talk about the scans of the vase and the conversations with Alex Dunn and Nick Sierra. And I mean, go and watch them. Go and watch them because, as I said, it's just a bloody vase, mate. But my God, it will change your life. It will change how you think about history. And it's one of the main things that actually got me into thinking about history in a different way. And it kind of led me down the road. I think I sent you a link for Robert Schoch. Now, Robert Schoch is a historian. He is a historian who implied that the narrative surrounding the Great Sphinx is not necessarily correct, and he got broken for it. Historians destroyed the guy for it. His theory was just based on the fact that within the Sphinx enclosure, there is a great wall around it where the ground was cut away for the Sphinx to be sat in. And along the wall of the enclosure, there is water damage. Obviously, the Sphinx itself has been restored over time, probably numerous times. We know the head of the Sphinx was almost definitely replaced. Not replaced, but resculpted into the head of a human. It was more than likely the head of a jackal or the head of a fox-like creature previously, but it's been resculpted into the head of a human. They believe this because of the proportions of the head to the body. It's not right, and there's one thing we know about Egyptians is that everything was perfect. They wouldn't get something like that wrong, so it almost implies that it was resculpted at one point. But the wall of the Great Sphinx enclosure has got water damage on it, and it's got wind damage as well, so you can tell the difference between wind damage and water damage based on the angle of the cuts into the rock. So wind damage over time, where wind picks up sand and it throws it at the wall, will cause horizontal carvings into a sandstone wall. Okay? Water, where it picks up the sand and it drags the sand over these walls, it will cause vertical cuts, what you call striations. I've talked about striations in the past. What essentially look like water damage down the side of the Sphinx enclosure. But the observation that Robert Schoch made was the level of striations on the Sphinx enclosure imply a level of water erosion that hasn't been seen in Giza for 14,000 years. And that in itself blew my mind. And like I said, I went from these vases and I kind of got caught up in a lot of the stuff that Ben Van Kerkwijk was talking about. And then I heard about Robert Schoch's work, and I was blown away by how the mainstream historians kind of didn't just poo-poo his theory. They didn't just say, "Oh no, you're rubbish, mate. You don't know what you're talking about." They attacked him. They wanted to make sure that he didn't look at this ever again. And I thought that's a really interesting thing, because if you don't agree with someone, you just say, "You know what, mate? You believe what you want to believe. I'm pretty sure I'm right, so I'm going to leave you to be wrong."
You just walk on by, which you see it all the time. You know, like people canvass for different political and religious groups all the time.
Yeah.
Like I didn't. Somebody approached me outside Westfields, an Islamic missionary, and I did a terrible job making a case for my faith. He did a good job making a case for his faith. I didn't kick off because he beat me in an argument.
Huh.
Like I just said, okay, you've given me some things to think about. And
However,
I walked off, and that is what everybody should do. Well,
yeah,
no, sorry, that's making too much of a... Right. In my mind, everyone should be able to express themselves a little bit better than we can. But in my mind, although I made a terrible defense of my own faith, I at least stuck to my guns in the fact that I didn't get all riled up by it. You just literally...
But what is it that gave you the ability to not get riled up by this difference of opinion? It's your confidence in your faith.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but
you might not be able to get that message across effectively. However, you still have your confidence in your faith. The only people that I personally believe attack others when they are challenged in their faith is those people who don't have that level of confidence in their own faith.
And they genuinely feel...
They genuinely feel threatened by this different opinion. Maybe they're right and I'm wrong, and that's horrible.
Like somebody who, when accused of something, goes far too much on the attack and says far too much that it's ridiculous and that the attacker is ridiculous.
They attack the person on a personal level.
Yeah.
Like, instead of just going at I mean, let's
what did they do? How did they try and debunk him and like his work? What did they do?
They didn't try to debunk his work. There were comments made to him about him being a plastic historian, and Robert Schoch has got doctorates. He's got numerous qualifications, and he was a very well respected historian, and I think he worked in geology as well, which is why he kind of got drawn to the point about striations in the Sphinx enclosure. And he was very well respected before he made this comment. But because he was very well respected, they couldn't just go and attack his work. They had to almost slander him. I don't have on hand some of the slanderous things that were said about him, but you can YouTube them, or you can Google them. As a matter of fact, I will do so now to see if I can find something. The mysterious anti-scientific agenda of Robert Schoch, as a comment. He builds a lot. There's a couple of things that are on there about how Robert Schoch is like, he's almost anti-establishment, anti-scientific, and none of it's like based on real fact. It's like the comments that you see in Ben Van Kerkwijk's video about the vases, where they're like, no, we can see it in paintings on the wall in the Egyptian tombs. We know how they created those vases. You're lying, sod off. And it's like, no, that's not what we said here. But we didn't at any point say they didn't create vases like that. What we did say was they didn't create these vases like that. And yet, you know, they didn't like they almost dismissed based on the fact that there is some information on how they created vases like this. So go away, you're an idiot. And they weren't kind in the way they were talking about it. And it's the same thing that they did with Robert Schoch. And like Randall Carlson worked for a long time as a engineer and as a architect, and then got into talking about the flood, the proof of megalithic floods or catastrophic floods in ancient times in America, and points out massive land ripples in America, and talks about the geological effects of water. And he was one of the people that looked into the problem that Robert Schoch presented, and agrees entirely with Robert Schoch about the water striations in the Sphinx enclosure. And it kind of, the main thing that I'm getting to here is that don't just take what you've been told as given. Like, ask more questions. I personally believe that the pyramids were built by the Egyptians. I don't think they dragged those stones up massive hills. It's more than likely that they created them from some kind of geopolymer concrete. There was a lot of sandstone around. There's a lot of limestone around the area as well, or lime around the area, and there is a reservoir of water underneath the pyramids themselves, like the Great Pyramids themselves. But there's enough resources nearby to make concrete that would essentially turn into stone, as you would perceive it, over time. But there's a good chance that they just built the pyramid through buckets and buckets of concrete over time, which makes a damn sight more sense than dragging tons and tons and tons of stone up hundreds and hundreds of feet. However, I was not there. I do not know. What I am trying to do is I'm trying to put a logical answer to questions that the mainstream narrative does not have a logical answer for. These vases are one of those things which the mainstream narrative does not have a logical answer for. I'm afraid I don't have a logical answer for it myself, given the fact that we would struggle, and I quote here, we would struggle to make vases like this now.
And that's exactly it. Like, that's it. So, yeah, I mean, the annoying thing is there are other examples of this sort of stuff, but it's
like we got an hour out of one vase.
Yeah, that's it.
Like, we could go into this for days. If we go any deeper, we will be here for the rest of your lives. And guys, you don't need that.
That's it. Okay, well, yeah. If it's all right, Nick, I think we've covered what we can without covering the same stuff again, or going on a complete tangent.
If we're going to go into more, I would like to do more research first to make sure that I'm not just dribbling.
Absolutely.
I need to do it justice. We want to do it justice. And at the same time, people want to hear fact and not just regurgitated libel and nonsense. So let's draw it to a close there. Thank you very much for listening, listeners. That was a double listeners. Let's go again. Very happy to have you here, and thank you again for all the support you show. It's a bye from me, and it's a bye from James.
Goodbye.